Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube. We have a very special guest waiting here in just a minute. Ari Meirov is going to join us for some free agency extravaganza here, a little preview. We previewed already, but we're going to do more previewing because news is breaking. We're going to break down all the news with Ari, and free agency just a few days away here, Sam.
Yeah, it's free agency doesn't start till Monday, but such is the NFL calendar. All the stuff's already happening. We're out here like half a week in advance of free agency. There's trades going down, there's deals being signed, there's all kinds of stuff going on.
Yeah, I think just to sum it up really quick before we bring Ari in, it does feel like we talked a lot about this week class being not that strong, right? Weak free agency class, but every team is in a different life cycle. Some teams have to cut money, some teams have a lot of money. So I think we're going to see more trades, and we're already starting to see that. Chicago Bears being real active. We'll get the whole story from Ari here in just a minute. Anything else at the top here, Sam?
Yeah, and not just trades. Remember, we always said the other caveat here is we're going to lose some players from this free agent class, right? Guys that get the tag applied to them and never actually hit the market. Guys that sign deals before free agency and stay with their team. We already saw Odigizua, the defensive tackle from Dallas, sign a new long-term deal. So we're going to lose some talent from what was already a relatively underwhelming free agent group. But we are going to gain some talent from these giant contract guys, on teams that are not in a position to keep them going, who will try and trade them first, right? You'll try and pick up a low draft pick from somebody, the Debo deal. We'll get to the Joe Thuney deal in a bit. But if they can, they'll release them, right? So you'll have guys like Davante Adams who get added to this free agent pool and change things as well. So that's the other thing. Like, you're going to get some names added to this free agent group that we maybe weren't expecting that will change the landscape. The only other thing that I wanted to throw up top is if you guys haven't checked out the interview we did yesterday with Ty Gleader, the kicking specialist, who, if you longtime listeners will know, we had him on the show years ago when he himself was trying to make it to the NFL as a kicker. Now he's become the guru, the pathway for a whole bunch of guys to try and make it themselves. There's a crop this year that are trying to make it. He's part of the International Player Pathway program down there in Florida. There's it's up there in our videos section, the tab in YouTube. So check that out.
Yeah, the easiest way to make sure you don't miss any of that is to hit the subscribe button here on the YouTube channel. So subscribe, hit the bell, do all the stuff, because we're going to be nonstop here. And Sam, you know what happens during free agency time. You never know when we're going to go live. We just click the button. We'll have our main shows, 9 a.m. Monday, 10:30 Wednesday, 10:30 Thursday. But you never know when we're going to go live exclusively here on the YouTube channel.
By the way, just to clarify, this is coffee, not alcohol, even though it's a wine glass, but it's thermal. It's thermal, right? So it keeps the thing hot as well as cool.
Good job. I use Good job mixing
coffee.
It up.
But if you didn't know that and you just saw this, you might think, at 10:30 a.m. Sam's dipping into the booze. That's all I'm saying.
I've seen you on Kay Adams' show drinking at 10 a.m. on her show in the past. Right. So you can't pull that past people here. All right, let's bring Ari in here. Ari Meirov, 33rd team. We're all part of the same team here. The 33rd team. Ari, the host of NFL Spotlight. Some big news for NFL Spotlight. Tell everybody what's going on this week. Ari, how you doing, man?
Well, doing good. It's great to be back on. And yeah, some big news over here. Obviously, I think everybody knows by now the off season for me is like my regular season. So we've been doing the NFL Spotlight shows since around July of last year. And it's usually been on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and whatever on my X page. But now we're expanding to YouTube as well, daily, every single day, Monday to Friday. We go around the NFL, talk about the news, and then every single Tuesday, we have a special spotlight guest, someone who deserves more recognition. This past week, a couple of days ago, we had Rams guard Kevin Dotson, who has turned out to be an exceptional player for them, signed a big extension last year. So some really good stuff. The show is awesome. And now we are on YouTube just like you guys are. So welcome to the family, I guess, the YouTube family.
Awesome. So check out NFL Spotlight if you guys are here. So you got to hit subscribe over here. Hit subscribe over at NFL Spotlight. Get all the news from Ari. So it's a busy time for you, man. So what did we just hear this morning? The Chicago Bears with their second trade for a guard, Jonah Jackson coming over from the Rams, and then today even bigger, Joe Thuney coming over from the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, the Bears are not messing around. Like, I mean, they want to work on those trenches. Ben Johnson, new head coach, had one of the best, arguably the best offensive line in Detroit. He goes into Chicago. This offensive line needs a lot of help. Trade for Jonah Jackson, take on the entire contract, even though he likely would have been cut. Joe Tooney, the Chiefs love him, love him, love him, but they just tagged Trey Smith, making him the highest paid guard in football with that tag. They already have the highest paid center in the NFL of Creed Humphrey. Joe needed an extension as well, 33 years old. They just couldn't do it. And they were like, you know what? We're going to have to look around and shop him. And they get a 4th round pick in 2026, clear that $16 million in cash and cap over here. A very difficult decision. We saw the offensive line in the Super Bowl, had a lot of struggles. So they're going to have to make some moves over here going into free agency and the draft to solidify that offensive line. But Chicago now, Braxton Jones, Joe Tooney, Jonah Jackson, Darnold Wright. They're going to address the center, I believe, in free agency. They're going to spend some money over there. So their offensive line is coming together over here, and they're not wasting time. Just one more thing about this trade and really the overall trade market this offseason. It's also an indictment on this upcoming free agent class, which really is the weakest we've had in many years. So a lot of teams have a lot of money to spend, cap space, cash, and all of that, but they're like, who are we spending it on? Like, there's nobody great over here in this free agent class that we want to spend it on. So they're willing to do trades and take on the contract. Usually some teams take on some of the money, the other team takes on the rest of the money. The Bears are taking on the entire contract in both of these trades because they have so much cap space, they have cash to spend, and they didn't like the free agent class out there. Trey Smith was the guy they wanted. Chiefs tagged him, so they pivoted to the trade market and they just added 2 big names over here and taking on the contracts as well.
So that's a great question, is that those are the players that we haven't necessarily had line of sight on, right? Who else should we be expecting to be the subject of these types of deals where bloated contract potentially available, teams with a lot of spending room to go and make moves happen? Who's next to the Joe Tooney deal coming out of nowhere that we were not expecting?
You look around the NFL, the thing that we've seen over here coming out of Combine Week is teams are allowing more and more players to just who they were planning to cut to go out there and check out the trade market. Maybe you could find somebody. All the agents speak to every team anyway. So we're planning to cut you, but if you could find the trade partner, that would be great. So we've heard names like Jair Alexander in the secondary, Harold Landry as a pass rusher, Sam Hubbard in Cincinnati. That's a tough one for them because he's been in Cincinnati his entire life since he was born. He's a Cincinnati guy. They might cut him, but they let him go out there and seek a trade. I don't know if that's out there, but that's currently going on. Jonathan Allen in Washington, Cooper Kupp in LA, Brandon Ayuk in San Francisco. That's one that's very interesting as well. His contract was structured in a way where there's this option bonus in there, which allows them to trade him right now if they could. So that's a very interesting one in San Francisco. The DK Metcalf stuff in Seattle, I don't buy a lot of it, but dating back to the trade deadline, his name has been floating around there. He needs a new deal. So that's one that I'm sure teams are calling, but I'm not sure if it's actually going to happen. I think Tyler Lockett, something happens to him down there in Seattle, not DK. But there's going to be a lot of trade movement over here this offseason simply because the free agent market is really not that strong. I mean, T. Higgins is off. Trey Smith is off. After that, you look at this free agent market, there are not many guys out there where it's going to be this crazy bidding war for them. So as a result, teams are working the trade market and trying to see, hey, is this guy available? Would you move him? Would you not? And the other thing that's very interesting, this is the first time I can remember every single team in the upcoming draft has their first round pick. So every single team could do a trade with their pick if we want to do some blockbuster stuff over here. So I think the trade market is going to be rather hot over here. It already is, but I think it's going to get even hotter over here in the coming days.
Ari Meirov, 33rd Team, co-host, the host of NFL Spotlight, now on YouTube. Ari, give everybody a sense of what we should expect over these next few days, the timeline, just to remind everybody, like, what are we looking at? The legal tampering versus the real league year. What are we looking at for next year before we get into some more of the specifics around free agency?
Yeah, so obviously today, Wednesday, March 5th, teams right now are still organizing their salary cap situations. Every team must be under the salary cap by Wednesday, a week from today. But that means we're still going to have a lot more cuts. more trades coming over here just to clear cap space. We're going to have a lot of restructuring contract, and it's my annual reminder to everyone, when a player restructures his contract, he's not taking a pay cut. It's just bumping it over, moving the can down the road over here. So a lot of people were commending CeeDee Lamb yesterday as if he took a $20 million pay cut. That's not what he did, but this is what happens every single year. But teams are organizing their salary cap books over here. And then on Monday at noon Eastern is when officially the legal tampering period begins, when teams are officially allowed to start talking to impending free agents. And that's when we're going to have deals agreed in principle with all these players who are going to become free agents. That could be Sam Darnold. That could be, Chris Godwin, Amari Cooper, Stephon Diggs. Those type of players officially could start agreeing to contracts on Monday, noon Eastern. That's really when all the madness officially begins. And then on Wednesday, March 12th, a week from today, is when all those deals that were agreed to on Monday and Tuesday could officially be signed, put pen to paper, and all the trades that have happened so far, that is, the Jonah Jackson trade, the Joe Thuney trade, Deebo Samuel trade, all of those officially become official as well, and they could officially report to their new team and their facility. So that's basically what's coming up over here. We're still going to have a lot of cuts, restructures, trades, and then officially Monday is when all the madness really begins. And Wednesday, all the stuff that happened becomes official, and more signings will happen as well.
So we talked about the trade market a bit. There is, though, going to be this absolute glut of salary cap money available, and certain players are going to have to get paid. Who are the guys that are going to end up doing, I think, a lot better than people were expecting, because the money's got to go somewhere?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one of my favorite questions to ask every year, whenever executives at the combine and just trying to get a feel of the market. One player who I think would have done really well if he made it to the market was Osa Odigizua, who ended up signing yesterday that extension in Dallas, 4 years, $80 million. I was hearing teams were willing to go up to $24, $25 million for him. I think they look at him as an ascending player, a durable player, but of course, he's now off the market, but he really would have blown the doors off if he made it to the open market. Dallas got ahead of it. He took a bit of a hometown discount to stay there in Dallas. But other players over here, let's start over here with the offensive line. Drew Dahlman, the center for the Atlanta Falcons, missed some time this past year with an ankle injury, but still just 26 years old. When he's on the field, he has been pretty good. I think he's somebody who could do really well in the open market, 10, 11, 12, $13 million per year. I would keep an eye on those Chicago Bears who need a center. That is one player over here that I think will do really well here on the open market. Jamien Sherwood, the Jets linebacker who started this past year for the first time in his career, played in all 17 games, started 16 of them, had a career high 158 tackles, was named team MVP by the players in the locker room, which says a lot also for the player that he is and the person that he is. His former head coach, Robert Saleh, now in San Francisco. His former defensive coordinator, interim head coach, Jeff Ulbrich, is in Atlanta. Former linebackers coach, Mike Rudenberg, who loves him, also in Atlanta. I think he's going to have a pretty hot market. Not many people talking about him. 10, 11, $12 million per year. Very possible for him. I think Trevon Moehrig, the safety from the Raiders, over 100 tackles last year, still just 25 years old. Willing tackler. I think he's somebody as well who get in those teens over here. I think the safety market is going to be rather hot this year with guys who are out there, Javon Holland, Cam Bynum, and Moehrig as well. I think those guys are all going to do pretty well over here on the open market. Byron Murphy in Minnesota, the cornerback. I've heard he wants to get to $20 million per year. Might be a bit difficult, but he had a team and career high 6 interceptions last year, 14 pass deflections, was a Pro Bowler. I had his DBs coach Durante Jones on the NFL Spotlight show a couple months ago, and he was just singing praises for Byron Murphy unprompted. So he means a lot to that team. I know they want to retain him. It's part of the reason why they didn't tag Sam Darnold, because it would have made it very difficult to end up signing him as well, because the $40 million would have hit the cap immediately. So they want to get a deal done. He wants to get to $20 million per year. I know he has a good market. I'm not sure if I'll make it to that number, but I'll keep an eye on him. Then one more name. I think the receiver market has so many big names, but guys who are a little bit older. I think Darius Slayton, the Giants receiver, 28 years old. I think he's somebody who could get a bit of a Darnell Mooney type of contract here in free agency next week. Has been fairly consistent with the Giants 4 of the last 6 years, has led that team in receiving yards. Doesn't really mean much, but he's been doing work over there with the ever-changing quarterback landscape of the Giants. So I think he's somebody who could do pretty well in free agency as well.
We didn't necessarily talk about this off air, but hoping I'm not putting you on the spot too much here, Ari. But a couple tight ends that we were wondering about, and the chat's wondering about. Michael Mayer from the Raiders has been already discussed. He's heading into year 3. Of course, they drafted Brock Bowers last year. Trade rumors around him, and because Kyle Pitts of the Falcons, former top pick and always seemingly underwhelmed, and this is Kyle Pitts' season, right? It's the off season. This is when all the hype starts. Anything on the Falcons potentially trading Kyle Pitts?
I haven't heard it. I mean, I do wonder, first of all, he is, extension eligible, was extension eligible last year. They picked up his 5th-year option last year. I just always wonder, when you are the GM who drafted that player and used the number 4 overall pick, are you really going to shoot yourself in the foot and say, you know what, I screwed up over here and just trade him for a 3rd-round pick, a 4th-round pick? Are you really going to let that happen? And everyone's going to say, wow, what a wasted pick. You took him before Jamar Chase. How could you do that? Like, do you want that narrative to build up over here this offseason if you're the GM in Terry Fontenot, who drafted him number 4 overall? So I don't think he's ready to do that. And the one thing that we've heard a lot about this offseason is that Michael Penix has been working with Kyle Pitts and trying to work with him, getting ready for his first full year as a starter. So if those two guys are training together and working together, as the GM, are you really going to pull the plug on him as well? So I have a hard time seeing it. We'll see if his agent, who I know is a very powerful one, wants to get him out of there. That's a whole different discussion, but I have not heard that to this point. And Michael Penix has publicly, I know he did the Radio Row in New Orleans, spoke very highly about him. So I just don't know if you really want to break that up over here. I know there's going to be the annual Kyle Pitts hype for fantasy people and everything, but I would imagine that they keep him over here and try to let him finish his rookie contract.
Like, the second part, I think, that's perfectly reasonable, right? Like, every offseason, the talent that Kyle Pitts has, everybody every year is always going to buy into any narrative that's like, this is the year it's going to break out, right? He's working with Michael Penix, whole different world. It's not Kirk Cousins. I'm all for, like, let's just see how that works out. But man, if that first part, that the analysis you were talking about with the GM is actually taking place, right? He's looking at this saying, in an abstract world, if I just saw what I've seen and took the names off it, took all the baggage off it, and I'm looking at this guy, I would get rid of him right now. But that would be like admitting defeat or admitting a mistake, and that's a bad thing for me to be doing publicly. God, that just feels like terrible process, doesn't it?
Well, Sam, look what they're doing to Kirk Cousins. He's not willing to admit that mistake right now. He's not willing to release him. I mean, everyone knows that his time is done over there. He has $27.5 million guaranteed this year. He has $10 million that will become guaranteed in 2026 in a few days from now. And they're adamant they're not going to release him and admit the mistake. So this is the GM and Terry Fontenot who historically doesn't let go of players. I mean, he's not somebody who ever trades down in drafts. He always stays where he is. Like, he comes from New Orleans. Like the Saints, we see what they do. They hold on to players way too long. And he's done that in Atlanta as well. So I have a hard time seeing him admit the mistake. If Kyle asks for a first start, that's a whole different conversation. But to this point, I've heard Kyle speak publicly. I've heard Michael Penix speak publicly. Both of them have been pretty adamant that they're working out with each other and getting ready for 2025.
All right, Ari, what about here in Cincinnati, where Sam and I live? A lot of discussion around what they're going to do with their stars. Joe Burrow actively recruiting or just, imploring the Bengals to keep his friends in town. T. Higgins gets the 2nd franchise tag. Jamar Chase, supposedly we have an initial contract offer, right, in Cincinnati. They're not necessarily close. How does all of this get sorted? Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Trey Hendrickson in Cincinnati.
I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible. If they want to keep all 3 players, they got to get to $40 million per year for Jamar, $30 million per year for T, and then about 33 per year for Trey Hendrickson. And they're nowhere close on all 3 right now. So that's kind of where they are right now. And it's interesting because I think the one that will eventually get done for sure is Jamar Chase. I mean, they said that at the combine. Their executive, Tuke Tobin, said we're going to make him the highest paid non-quarterback in football. Right now, that is 34 a year or 35 a year. They're right now sitting at 36, 37, but his agent, who also happens to be the same agent for T. Higgins, was like, if you wanted him at that number, that was last year. You guys made him play another year of a year and entering the final year of his contract. Now we got to go to a whole new stratosphere. So his number right now is $40 million per year. For T. Higgins, now that they've tagged him at 26 a year, The reason why it's a little bit complicated now is because he knows for sure, no matter what, next year they're not tagging him for a third time. So he's going to have that ability to go to the free agent market next year at age 27, and he's going to make it. They're not tagging him a third time. It becomes too expensive. So now you have to get to a number where it's worth it for him to do an extension versus playing it out and for sure making it to the open market at age 27. As long as he's healthy, he's going to get a big contract next year and have more teams at the table. So that's where it becomes a little bit complex. He did switch agents a few months ago to have the same agent as Jamar, just to make things even more uncomfortable over here for them. And Joe Burrow has been putting this public pressure out there to the organization, where from weeks 16, 17, 18, he was out there doing his media sessions and talking about how important it is to have T-Bag. Last year, when they tagged him for the first time, they told him and his former agent that we're tagging you once. We're not going to try to do an extension now. Go play it out. You become a free agent next year. All of a sudden, Joe Burrow put all this public pressure on them, and it's like, holy cow, we have the quarterback over here going crazy on us. We got to do something. So the only difference this year is, yes, they've tagged him, but they've had more extension talks than they had at this time last year. Now, will that result in a deal? I'm not sure. I do know T is very frustrated. The one thing that T has also told his new agent is that I'm controlling the narrative this year, which is why, if you guys have realized, he's been tweeting every single news thing that has happened so far. And if anything goes wrong, he puts out that blue cap and saying it's not true. So he's going to control the narrative this year on his own, and I'll let anybody else do it. But to this point, they're not at $30 million per year, and the guarantees are not that strong. And it's still taking some time. And believe me, the Joe Burrow pressure, it's getting to the front office, it's getting to the ownership. They know about it. They know that they cannot have this keep on going every year where they let good players out the building. Jesse Bates, DJ Reader, and on. Every year, they keep on having good players leave the building, which as a result is part of the reason why they've struggled a little bit on the field. Trey Hendrickson is the other one. To this point, again, they're very far apart. What I would say is that a couple of weeks ago, I would have said there's no chance he gets traded. I think there's the possibility is out there. Like, if they're able to get a crazy, crazy offer for him, I think they'd be willing to listen. They don't want to trade him. They want to keep him. But now their ears are a little bit open, I would say, when it comes to that situation. So it's one to watch over here. The number has to be 32, 33 million per year in order to make it happen. He has 1 year and $16 million left. He knows his value. He knows that Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, Max Crosby, and those type of players are all going to get paid this offseason as well. Those guys also third contracts. So he knows where the market is going, and he wants to be paid accordingly. And to this point, they've been very far apart, like they've been with the other two guys as well.
How likely do you think that it is that somebody shows up with a trade offer that makes the Bengals interested in T. Higgins? So they've obviously tagged him, but that doesn't mean, and they would like to keep him. They're trying to talk to make an extension, but with all this money they have to find to make that happen. We're in a world now where, as you said, every single team's got their first round draft pick. If it would even take that with a low first round pick, how likely is it that a team in this free agent group that's not amazing looks at T. Higgins as the clear number one guy? They have the money to spend, that they're willing to trade something to the Bengals that would make them move T. Higgins. And then the second question I wanted to hit you, that's just a quick one to confirm. Cincinnati can do this, right? Like, this is not a case of, oh man, we can only really afford to pay one of these guys. Like, if they want to keep three of these guys in the building, it's expensive, but they can do that.
Yeah, let me start with the second part. Yes, they could do it. I mean, everyone brings up the fact that they are cash poor compared to other teams, but every team has ways of structuring contracts. The Bengals are very unique, where they only usually guarantee the first year. They give you a very large signing bonuses, but they did change that precedent a little bit with Joe Burrow. But if they want to do this, they could do it. And I think they should realize, and I think Joe Burrow has put that pressure on them to realize that we're in a situation right now where we have good players and we could compete, and we're letting good players out the building, and we cannot let this happen. They've changed their business fashion over here over the last couple of years where, they changed the naming rights and they've built a new locker room and they've done different things over here to get better. The one thing they haven't changed yet is the way they handle contracts. So if they're willing to change the structures where they're willing to spread out the guarantees a little bit more instead of doing this one big lump sum payment, they could definitely make it happen and make it a little bit easier instead of having this problem with the cash every single year and giving it out in year one so heavy and not doing the rest of the year. So there's ways of doing this. And if they're willing to break precedent, it could become even easier. But every team is able to do it. I mean, Joe Burrow brought the Eagles example. That is a very extreme one, but they should at least be able to get to half of to the middle point of where the NFL is when it comes to their cash spending and the way they're able to handle the salary cap and restructure contracts. Like, they don't do it that much. And if they're willing to do it, they'd be able to get all these guys under contract and make it happen. So we'll see if they change it. I know that the pressure has gotten to them. The Joe Burrow stuff. Joe Burrow is a very private guy. The fact that he's willing to go out there and become public and he doesn't need to go to Media Row and be, sponsored by FedEx. He has enough money. He's doing it because he wants to get the message across publicly. So he's been doing it just to get the message across. And I think it's gotten across, but now it's time to actually get these deals done. And we'll see if they do. The T trade stuff, it's known around the NFL. If they were willing to put him on the block, there's one team who would be very, very aggressive. It would be New England. But to this point, again, he has not been available on the trade market. And just the Bengals historically, just the way the franchise operates, they don't get rattled by trade requests. They were not rattled last year by T. They were not rattled the year before by Jesse Bates. They were not rattled by Carson Palmer years ago. There was Carlos Dunlap, Chad Ochocinco, TJ Houshmandzadeh. All those players made trade requests, and they were like, okay, so what? It just doesn't affect them. So I don't think it would work with a team like them, which is why, to this point, with a new agent, T has not done it yet. There have been rumblings out there. Will he do it? And I'm watching and waiting for it. But to this point, he hasn't done it. But if they put him on the market, I guarantee you many teams would be interested. And one team would likely offer their first-round pick, assuming it's not a top 5 pick or a top 10 pick. They would do it. So they would just have to be willing to put him out there. But will they actually do that and get Joe Burrow pissed off? I don't think it's worth it. So I don't think they would ever do it.
Ari, any final words before we let you go? Crazy predictions for next week? Anything else you want to touch on?
I don't know if I have a crazy prediction. I mean, a few things that I'm kind of watching, I think people around the NFL are aware of. I think the Carolina Panthers will be an interesting team to watch. Last year, they were very aggressive on the offensive line in free agency. I think they're going to be very aggressive on the defensive line in free agency this year. They're all about the trenches right now. I love the way they're really building that team right now. So I would keep an eye out on them and the defensive line here in free agency. And then just, follow us here at My Sports Update on Twitter, the NFL Spotlight Show. Like we said in the beginning, it's on YouTube now, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, my X page. Go check out the interviews. Go check out our daily discussions going around the NFL, talking about the ripple effects, what's going to happen, what to watch for. So it's going to get busy. It's my favorite time of the year. It's a lot of money being thrown around, and we'll see how it all shakes out and how these teams build their roster for 2025.
Ari Meirov, 33rd Team, and NFL Spotlight Show. Go be sure to follow on YouTube, as we've been saying. Thanks, Ari. Really appreciate it, man.
Anytime, my friends.
Thanks, Ari.
Shout out to Ari, as always. So a reminder, NFL Spotlight. It's not just on X any longer, wherever you listen to your podcast, and right here on YouTube. All part of, we're all on the same team here, Sam, 33rd Team. Big time of year. It's Ari's favorite. It's my favorite, too, team building season. Because you got all 32 fan bases, I think, engaged. It's not like halfway through the year where some fan bases check out. We're all engaged here during free agency time and draft season.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good. All right, let's talk some other stories and news that we have. We didn't get to touch on with Ari right there. Well, what's your initial thought on the Joe Thuney trade and what that means for Kansas City? And one more, and another explanation. It is difficult to wrap your head around in the NFL. Big name players, even a guard, big name players being traded for a 4th round draft pick. It is tough to wrap your head around that sometimes. Why is Kansas City doing this, and what does it mean for Chicago?
Yeah, I mean, it just shows you the power of both age and contract, right? Obviously, I mean, Joe Thuney was arguably their best offensive lineman last year, and a guy who at guard has the flexibility to kick out and play left tackle at a manageable level. Now, was he a great left tackle? No, but a guard being able to do that at all is, number one, extremely impressive. Number two, very useful. Like at a pinch, if your left tackle goes down, you don't need to go and trade for Cam Robinson, right? You can theoretically ask Joe Thuney to kick out and do that job, and the season survives. So it's incredibly valuable. And number two, you hear anybody connected with the Chiefs talk about what an amazing leader and veteran presence, and like how important Thuney was in coaching up effectively, right? As a veteran guy, Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith, like they credit him a lot for the development of those young guys. So the idea that, you know, you would get rid of that guy for a 2026, not even this year, but like next year's 4th round draft pick sounds insane. But it's the last year of his contract. He's going to need a new deal. He's 32 years old, and you've already committed a ton of money to Creed Humphrey. You've just tagged Trey Smith to keep him around. So you've got a ton of money committed in that offensive line. They basically just can't extend him again. So if you can't do that, it's like, do you keep him for 1 year where he's going to be angling for a new deal? How does that work? Or do you say, let's cash in now, let's pick up a draft pick? So this is just like, that's what happens to the value of these players, is like the abstract theoretical value of the guy then gets attacked with a discount because of his age and the contract that's due. And a team like Chicago, who has money to spend and a need at guard, is like, hell yeah. And they grab hold of him. It's like, it's the Washington, Debo deal, but on the offensive line.
Yeah. I mean, so Kansas City still has some work to do. Just to, again, I separate this cap compliant versus cap flexibility. Kansas City's trying to do a little bit of a roster reset where they have a little bit more cap flexibility in the coming years here. And clearly they couldn't be paying, they couldn't have 2 really high priced guards in the top center, right? They couldn't do all of that. So on paper, it's like, all right, how are you going to replace a Joe Thuney, right? You have to trust your drafting. You have to trust, development or make another move that's maybe for half the price of a Joe Thuney, at left guard for next year. And then for the Bears, anytime if you use over the cap and you go check out salary cap space and you click on effective cap space, the teams with effective cap space, the ability to spend, are almost always the teams that have a rookie contract quarterback or no quarterback in the case of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the Bears are in that top 6 or 7 range when it comes to having money to spend. And we come back to, who are you going to spend it on? Who are you throwing money at in free agency? Why not do it for, why not trade? And when you're in that spot, like we talked about with Washington, if you've created the cap space and you've drafted in some level of volume over the last couple of years, now you have the ability to flip a 4 or 5 or a 6 for a starter. And as Ari was mentioning, the ability to take on the contracts, that's where the cap space, that's where the flexibility comes in, especially in this free agent world where you might not want to break the bank for, a second tier guard when you can have a high end guard like Joe Thuney. And even in his 30s, right? Like these guys don't, look, Zach Martin regressed around this age over the last couple of years, but usually get a couple more years, out of your 30-year-old, mid 30-year-old guards here. So I think it's a good move for the Bears, obviously being uber aggressive on the offensive line. And when you have the rookie contract quarterback, you don't want to take any of those chances. You can be aggressive and you can, quote, overpay for certain positions because of what you're saving a quarterback. So I like this for Chicago. And add what Ari said as well, Sam, if they're going to be aggressive in free agency, do they go and pay for a Drew Dahlman, one of the top centers on the market? So now you've shored up your interior, much like what the Rams did a couple years ago where they attacked guards and center. You could shore up that interior if you're the Bears. Darnell Wright had a really nice second season at right tackle. Braxton Jones has been solid at left tackle. So all of a sudden, the Bears are looking pretty good up front. They could still draft a tackle to, add to the mix, add some competition for when Braxton Jones, hits free agency soon. I mean, I think it's a good job by Ryan Poles and the Bears, and it's a bit of a reset for the Chiefs to give themselves, more money to play with.
Yeah, I mean, the Bears, look, that offensive line in Detroit, since Ben Johnson has been there, has been top 2 offensive line in the NFL, right? It's been right up there with the Eagles. And Ben Johnson evidently has no interest in discovering whether that still works. That offensive system is still great if the offensive line is shoddy. So they're already, again, we're half a week out from free agency, and they've already upgraded 2 spots on that offensive line. Now, look, Jonah Jackson, good player, but marred with injury. So that's a question mark. It's not necessarily a cast iron upgrade at this point, but Tooney definitely is. I mean, the Bears are clearly not screwing around when it comes to the offensive line. They want to make sure that that is a strength of this offense so that Ben Johnson can go to work with Caleb Williams and not have to worry about that. From the Chiefs, look, I get trading him away because of the contract thing, but all of a sudden, complete question mark at left tackle. Now complete question mark at left guard. Maybe that'll be Kingsley Suamataia kicked into guard. He played there in that final game of the regular season where it was all backups. So maybe that's what they'll do. Center obviously is good with Creed Humphrey. Right guard will be good with Trey Smith when they keep him around. And then Juwan Taylor, who's been a complete letdown at right tackle relative to the investment in him. On paper right now, this is the worst offensive line since that Tampa Bay Super Bowl, which caused them to change their entire approach to the offensive line. So the Chiefs all of a sudden have a lot of work to do on that offensive line to get it back to a state where they're comfortable with it going into the season.
The one I've compared the Chiefs to the Patriots a lot through the years because they're the closest thing to a dynasty, right? To what New England was, that ability to just always be in the championship game and in the Super Bowl more often than not. So a couple things that happened during the Patriots dynasty. I think that they always kind of let young players go, right? That was the Belichick thing. And my thought on that is that Belichick would, because you have this foundation of Tom Brady, you were allowed to make. You had the flexibility to make some not so great moves, or maybe some other teams didn't. But they let young players walk all the time, like in their prime. They were a year earlier instead of a year late. That was one distinguishing characteristic of the Patriots dynasty, and for the most part, they maintained their excellence for the better part of 20 years. So I think Kansas City can do that, right? They can swing that. On the other hand, though, when New England there was a difference in certain years roster wise when it was like, hey, they can definitely win the Super Bowl versus if they might run into some better teams in the AFC Championship or whatever it might be. And for New England, it was when their receivers, when they kind of let that fall apart. It does feel like for Kansas City, it's when they let their offensive line fall apart. So this might be riskier than letting Tyreek go a couple of years ago. With Tyreek, you get all this draft capital back, and they restructured their entire defense. You have George Karlaftis, you have Trent McDuffie, you have more bodies on the defensive side of the ball if you're Kansas City. But now Kansas City taking a bit of a risk here, being a year early, so to speak, on a Joe Tooney. And where do you go? So there's still free agents to get. There's still guys like Will Hernandez, maybe, or these second tier free agents to get, or you have to draft and develop. So it puts a little bit more pressure, I think, on the rest of the front office to make sure that they keep that offensive line intact. And as you said, far more question marks now than they've had in a while.
And even last year, the offensive line was creaking in a way that it hadn't, since they'd made those investments. They didn't fix left tackle at all, to the point where they were asking Joe Tooney to play left tackle because they thought that was the best of a bunch of bad options. Juwan Taylor has not gotten back to his best play ever since arriving in Kansas City. I mean, he's just not lived up to that contract. And in the Super Bowl, they were overwhelmed the way that we haven't really seen from them since that Tampa Bay game. So even with Joe Tooney there, this was an offensive line that had some question marks that needed to be addressed in the offseason. Now, electing to move on from him, you just add another spot to that whole dynamic. And yeah, like the Chiefs are under some pressure this offseason to try and repair that and get it back in good order.
All right, much like many of these other players who have been given permission to seek a trade, Davante Adams has been cut by the New York Jets. There'll be no trade here. And, I think he's still good, Sam. He's getting older, but I think he's still good. Now, let me give you this caveat here when it comes to receivers before I get some ideas on where you think Davante could land. Last year at this time, I felt pretty good about Stephon Diggs being a contributor. He got hurt. When Amari Cooper was traded midseason for the Bills, I felt pretty good about him still being a contributor. He had a couple games where he helped the Bills, but wasn't really an impact player in a spot where they could use an impact player like an Amari Cooper. And then DeAndre Hopkins similar. I thought that was a great move by the Kansas City Chiefs. How could the league let the Chiefs get DeAndre Hopkins, and he, outside of a couple games, wasn't really a major factor for the Chiefs? So my point in all this is that big name receivers, can hit a wall, right? They can hit a wall in pretty quickly. So is there a little buyer beware on Davante Adams? Even though the last thing we saw from him, he was the best receiver on the Jets for Aaron Rodgers down the stretch. It feels like he can still play. Is there a good fit for Davante? Should we be cautious about where he is in his career?
Yeah, I mean, both. Like, he can definitely still play, right? Davante Adams is still a really good player, but he's 32 years old, and you would be crazy not to factor that into whatever deal you're looking to sign him to if you're bringing him in, right? So there's plenty of teams where immediately Davante Adams would be a massive upgrade, if not their best receiver. I mean, best receiver, you obviously have to look at someone like the Patriots. Davante Adams is their best receiver right now if they signed him. Now, young quarterback, how long is he a solution for? That's a question to debate. I think with the Patriots, you can construct a similar argument to the one I was making a few years ago for DeAndre Hopkins and Bryce Young. It doesn't matter that he's a short-term option, right? It's not like people think because you have a young quarterback, the only players you should be focusing on are long-term solutions, right? Guys that can grow and develop with him so that in 2 or 3 years' time, everybody's hitting their prime together. I don't think it works like that. Like, you just need an upgrade. You just need a player that's good right now that Drake May can work with. And if that only lasts 2 years and you then move on to the next guy, it served its purpose, right? The point was to make the situation around Drake May viable so that in a couple of years' time, like, he's good. He's been able to develop, and now you can go find a receiver that can work with him for the next 8 years or whatever. But, like, I don't think it necessarily tallies that just because Drake May looks like the guy and you expect him to be there for the next 10 years. You need a receiver that can, match paths within the whole way. Like, Davante Adams to the Patriots makes some sense to me, and he would be their number one receiver. But I think for other teams, that are looking for a solution that lasts more than a year or two, you have to look at them and say, I don't know how long you're going to get Davante Adams for. So, Pittsburgh, right? Would he be a great compliment to George Pickens? Yes. Do they want to bring him in knowing that might only be a 1 or a 2 year thing? And how expensive is it going to be when they do it? Like, that's the debate you have to work with. The aging thing, though, is interesting because the other thing I would say is that, look, on the one hand, Davante Adams was never like an athletic phenom, right? He was a technician, and his work was by route running and being able to just destroy people with technique. In your mind, you sort of think that would age better than a guy who gets by on athleticism and suddenly the athleticism goes away or they lose a step. It doesn't always tally that way, though. Like, sometimes even the guys that are technicians, when they lose a step, like, they lose it everywhere, and the technique doesn't work as well because DBs aren't giving you the respect that they used to. Suddenly they're getting more aggressive and they're messing with your technique. And that can change everything. The other thing is, look, Davante Adams has always been good. He has, however, been uniquely special when Aaron Rodgers is there. And that symbiotic connection that they have, the telepathic work, the back shoulder stuff, like, that works both ways. It's both the best version of Aaron Rodgers, but it's also like Davante kind of needs those plays to be as good as he can be, because a lot of those plays, he's not quote unquote open. It's just Rodgers knows if he throws a back shoulder, it's single coverage. Adams will adjust, right?
Right.
You need to put him somewhere where the quarterback is willing to put those balls in the air, and that's not everywhere, right? So Adams, I think, is a really interesting add to this free agent group, and I think he helps a lot of teams. But it's not like, you need to be careful what you're bringing, the team that's bringing him in, and that they're prepared to use him the way that he needs to be used.
Yeah, a couple things on Adams. There were rumblings yesterday that people connected those dots, obviously, like, hey, wherever Aaron Rodgers goes, Davante goes.
Right.
But the rumors coming out were that Davante would rather just be on the West Coast than with Aaron Rodgers, that might be priority one versus being with Rodgers. If that is the case, the Chargers have a massive wide receiver need and cap flexibility. As I said, most of the teams that have the high amount of effective cap space, most of them have rookie contract quarterbacks, but it's the Chargers up there as well, who have Justin Herbert locked in. They have Lad McConkey. Do they want to go into the draft with a massive wide receiver need with some questions at the top of the draft? He would be a nice complement, I think, to Ladd McConkey for at least a year or two. Of course, the other team that we keep connecting as needing an X, so to speak, is the Buffalo Bills. And we said, look, there's no free agent options. There's very few draft options. All of a sudden, Davante Adams. Now they're not on the West Coast or anything, but is that a good fit, or is that actually not a good fit for the way the Buffalo Bills have been drafting? Because, as you mentioned, not only was Adams pretty special with Rodgers, he's just special in like a high volume attack as well, where he's getting 10 to 15 targets because he's earned those through the years. Part of the reason why it probably didn't feel like Amari Cooper was a big impact for the Bills is because of how they're playing the offense, is because it's Khalil Shakir when he's open, it's Dalton Kincaid when he's open, it's the backs out of the backfield. They were spreading the ball around. They were running the ball. They were mixing it up from game to game. Do you actually need a high volume receiver who might need to be targeted 10 to 15 times in a game when Josh Allen is just doing a good job of not forcing the ball and not, relying on one or two players like maybe he had in the past? So maybe it's not a great fit for Buffalo. As much as you want a one-on-one winner, I don't know that they want a high volume receiver the way they've been spreading the ball around. So I think the Chargers, though, could be a really nice fit for Davante Adams. You can do the West Coast thing. I saw the chat bring up the Rams, with Cooper Kupp on the way out here and Davante Adams being the number 2 to Puka Nacua. I think that could be outstanding.
The Rams, I think, are also a great example. Like, Stafford's the type of quarterback that makes sense, right? He will give Adams those opportunities to just win that aren't technically, open, but he knows are safe, comfortable, good targets for Adams to get. I really like that from a quarterback wide receiver connection standpoint. I don't know if I love it necessarily overall for the Rams, but I think that definitely makes sense, just connecting those two players. I wonder if Arizona, I'd like generally a lot of young receivers, Kyler Murray, whatever he is as a quarterback at this point, but like Davante Adams with that receiving core adds some teeth that aren't necessarily proven or there consistently with Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Wilson. I think that would be an interesting connection. It's not technically West Coast, but it's West adjacent.
It is West adjacent. It's not on the coast. West Desert. Let's talk Aaron Rodgers while we're here, because I think they are potentially tied and where Aaron Rodgers would land. To me, a team that signs Aaron Rodgers and or Davante Adams, right, and tries to bring both of those guys in together, they have to feel like they're close, or that even that they're not close, they don't have a quarterback, but Aaron Rodgers all of a sudden makes them a contender. And then if it's Aaron Rodgers plus Davante Adams, and of all the QB needy teams, right, the Titans, Browns, the Raiders, of course the Jets, right, we have to eliminate some of those. Could the Raiders want to make this move with Rodgers, bring Davante Adams back to Vegas? Would they want to bring both of those guys together? Would the Titans? I don't think the Titans are going to be in this mix here. I think they want to completely get younger and reset. So I don't think they're going to play the Rodgers game, but who knows? Is it the Giants? The rumors have been there as well that there's been talks. Are the Giants perhaps the most QB, desperate team? They were close on Matthew Stafford. Would they go that route? Aaron Rodgers, maybe plus Davante Adams, and you have Malik Neighbors there, and all of a sudden you feel like, all right, yeah, we're competing in the NFC East if you believe in that group. And then the Steelers, who you mentioned as a potential Davante Adams suitor, do they feel like, hey, we've got this foundation of Tomlin, he's going to get us 9 no matter what. Rodgers gets us to 11 or 12 wins, and we're competitive. So is there a fit here for Rodgers for you and or Davante Adams, maybe coming with him?
I mean, I've been fascinated by that Rodgers-Pittsburgh connection as an option, but the fact that there's been zero talk of that, like I haven't heard that as a rumor, as a conversation, as an option that people are throwing around.
Steelers rumors tend to get out there, right? Like they tend to be some truth to Steelers rumors, right?
So the fact that really hasn't been a thing suggests to me that the Steelers aren't really interested in that. And I get it. I mean, I think, it's risky. I think there's a potential payoff there, but I also think it's massively risky. And I don't know that you'd want to jump into that. So now you're like, it really is because I think Rodgers as an option is a desperation option. It's like, man, we don't like where we are right now, and we're just going to take a swing in the hope that Aaron Rodgers has the payoff that we need. So I don't think the Titans are desperate at this point. Like they're just not in that life cycle. They're not in the desperation world. The Raiders, you could paint a case that they would be simply, but it's institutional. It's like just because they've missed out on quarterback for several times already and they're picking, relatively low in that top 10, but all of a sudden it looks like Shador could slide to them anyway. They still have the ability to trade up. And with Tom Brady now, as a new regime, like I don't know that they're desperate either. So the team out there that smacks of desperation the most is the New York Giants, who took themselves out of the number 1 overall pick, who have already been linked heavily and apparently were very close to the Matthew Stafford deal, which is a totally different world of drafting a quarterback at the top of the draft. Like that inconsistency to me is what screams like they're just trying to make something happen, right? This is not, they don't have a coherent plan. This is what we are doing. This pathway. It's like, we just need a quarterback, any quarterback. Literally, they don't have one right now. So they're like, we just need any type of quarterback. And if it's a guy in the draft, if it's Matthew Stafford, I don't really care. It just needs to be something that doesn't read Daniel Jones at the top of the depth chart. That's their plan right now. So that type of plan is what can lead you to Aaron Rodgers. And I think, honestly, if it's not the Giants, I don't think he's signed before the draft. If it's not the Giants, he ends up being the backup option to the team that crapped out in the draft and didn't get their guy. And now they're just like, oh no, where do we get a quarterback from? Well, Rodgers is out here. Let's pick up the phone.
No, he really might be out of suitors. He really might be. And look, I think if you're the Giants, though, this is the conversation. We're sitting there at 3. We could trade up to get Cam Ward and bring some hope to the fan base, but we're still not going to be great this year unless Cam Ward is Jaden Daniels level special. Could be, right? I reserve the right for all quarterback evaluations in the draft to go any which way, right? Unless he's special, it's probably a challenging year for the Giants. Now, that doesn't mean Rodgers, who's coming off a 5-win season with the Jets, absolutely makes you better. But you could paint the picture of, we bring in Rodgers, the number 3 pick is Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, right? Like, say Travis Hunter's coming to town with Aaron Rodgers and maybe even with Davante Adams, right? So you've got this mix of the short-term and the long-term play, and you've got Malik Neighbors and Travis Hunter on the same team. And I don't know, man. Like, I feel like you could have some exciting conversations in that building and feel pretty good about what you might be able to put on the field this year.
I also don't think signing Aaron Rodgers takes them out of the quarterback market in the draft. I mean, it's a different regime, but this was a team that drafted, Eli Manning at the top of the draft. They weren't planning on starting him year 1. That was supposed to be Kurt Warner's job. And then they decided, whatever it was, 5-7 games into it, we're going to put the kid out there. New York media market, like, I think they want to ease these guys into it. So Rodgers can be the bridge quarterback to Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders if they like one of those guys at the top of the draft. But he would at least start for them right away, theoretically. Like, the number of teams, I think, where you can say that for Rodgers is just dwindling. And it feels a little bit like when the league was like, yeah, Bill Belichick, great as you might still be, we're just having a tough time finding a fit for you right now. That's kind of where it is with Rodgers. Like, you might still have a good season or 2 or 3 or however many in you, but we're just finding a tough spot to make that happen right now. This is the thing. Like, so many times when the NFL it decides it's done with a player, it's not because the guy can't still play. It's just because it's hard to find the place where he can still show it, where they have the right fit of, like, timeline and money and all these kinds of things. Like, Terrell Owens could have still kept cooking for 5 years, right? But the league at basically was like, you've worn out your welcome in a bunch of spots. It's just tough to find a spot for you right now. So bye now, right? That sort of feels like where we are with Rodgers. The Jets thing was such a catastrophe and a fiasco that it's hard to find the next team willing to be like, you know what? It might work now. Let's give it a shot.
Because the term life cycle that you mentioned earlier, that we mention a lot on the show, is important. Most of the teams that are potential suitors have been working through veteran quarterbacks over the last few years, or just, in the Giants case, stuck with Daniel Jones for a while. In the Steelers case, they've been cycling through different options, right? So I think all of those teams are at this point where they want to stop the slide, right? Stop dealing with a different QB every year or every 2 years, or a failed draft pick in the Giants case, and they want to have the future. And so now you're just saying, we'll extend it one more year. We'll draft next year. We'll draft next year. We'll draft. You keep doing that. That's where I think it's tough to find, a spot where Aaron Rodgers fits. And then everything else I said, where he just he brought his offensive coordinator. He brought his favorite receivers. He brought his favorite everything. They went to free agency and got Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses, the great Morgan Moses, and it didn't work, right? I mean, let me just honestly, are there any situations that will be better than what the Jets had on paper last year? On paper, the Jets situation was pretty good. Right. And Rodgers couldn't elevate that group. Is there another situation that's actually going to be better than what they had last year with the Jets, especially after they added Davante Adams to the mix? That's going to be a challenge. So, anything else on Rodgers? We'll talk.
No, I mean, so the other thing is, like, he's not necessarily, like, when the Jets signed him, remember, like, all the offseason stuff, the hype videos, the Hard Knock stuff, it was all like nothing but good vibes, right? Like, there was reverence for Rodgers within that building. All the Jets players, all the coaches, like, they were treating this guy like he was God, riding in to save the franchise. And then when it went south, it was like all of a sudden that aura just disappeared. It's like Rodgers is no longer. So what I'm saying is, in a bad situation or with bad outcomes, it's not necessarily that Rodgers' attitude, demeanor, history, gravitas, resume is not necessarily a positive anymore. Like, we're not looking at this guy and saying he's definitely going to make the most of whatever the situation is that's there. And if the situation isn't good enough, that's on somebody else. Now you're looking at this, you're like, if this isn't good, Rodgers, the way he is, might not actually be a positive. Like, it might be a detriment. If this isn't a good thing right out of the gate, Rodgers is not necessarily the guy that's going to drag it in a positive direction. That, I think, is maybe the most damaging part to him finding the next job. Is it's not just that it didn't work with the Jets, it's that it wasn't clear that he wasn't making it worse. Even if his play on the field wasn't that bad, but his whole, like, the way the Rodgers is, right? He's an unconventional character, let's put it that way. It's not immediately clear that that's a positive thing in all situations anymore. And that, I think, is the most damaging thing. Like, if you drag Tom Brady off the couch right now, you would be pretty confident that regardless of what it is, Brady's getting the most that's there out of that, right? In a positive direction. Rodgers, I don't think, can necessarily make that case anymore. And that's maybe his biggest problem.
We have somewhat breaking news here throughout the show. Gardner Minshew going to get his release from the Raiders, and Sam Hubbard going to be getting his release from the Cincinnati Bengals.
And
franchise icon.
Was there a report that he's just going to straight retire off the back of that?
Oh, he just retired too?
Well, he's the local boy, right? He's never been outside. I mean, that man would rather hang up his cleats than move outside of the range of Cincinnati Skyline Chili.
Oh, yeah. Dan Hope says, and others, former Ohio State defensive end Sam Hubbard retiring from the NFL after 7 seasons, all with the Bengals. So he's out. He was a good player early in his career. Clearly unable to get after the quarterback effectively last year. So Bengals had they had an edge rush need anyway. So that just is confirmed with Hubbard released / retired here for the Cincinnati Bengals.
At 29.
It's a good time to retire. I retired at 30 from baseball with less money.
Was that also right after getting cut?
No. Not from the independent Southern Maryland Blue Crabs. I was perhaps asked not to come back.
You made it known that you would be available for the next deal, and one just didn't materialize?
Well, you remember in 2000, that was 2011. In 2012, I did have a job with the Worcester Tornadoes to be the closer until Jose Canseco came back. I did look to play baseball overseas. I was looking to go to Japan. Again, things didn't materialize. They pay well in Japan. Did not materialize in the Asian market for me. Saquon Barkley extended yesterday. What are you shaking your head about?
Without derailing this whole thing sideways, you couldn't have gone to Japan. You'd have been like Godzilla walking around there.
That's the thing. They would pay well for Godzilla. You know what I'm saying?
I mean,
They would
yeah,
pay.
but like just from a logistics standpoint, you couldn't have been walking around Tokyo at that size. Like that would have been ridiculous.
Yeah, that's part of the aura. I had a former teammate that played out there. He was 6'7". You know, they loved him. A 6'10" relief pitcher, right? Throwing 89 to 93. Boom. Hero.
And this
Would
is
have been a hero.
also in a world
That's right,
before
Kenny.
like, 24/7 social media. Like you would have, it would have been a waste. Now you could have done it. It would have been hilarious. Like back then, nobody would have been filming this like this. It would have waste.
Should I start training to go back to Japan? What else we have here?
Saquon.
Saquon Barkley extension yesterday. They add 2 years, 41 million to his already, to his multi-year contract. In addition to Darius Slay's getting released, James Bradbury getting released for the Eagles. I think Bradbury definitely expected, Slay mostly expected. Rumors about Slay perhaps wanted to finish his career in Detroit, which I think would be an outstanding fit for Darius. But your thoughts on Saquon? Is this just like the way the report is? It's just like, hey, thanks for the Super Bowl. Here's some more money. But that's usually not how businesses operate. So is this how it is? Because the Niners kind of did this with Christian McCaffrey. They were just like, hey, you're awesome. Let's just make you the highest paid running back. Here's a ton of money. And then, he had, double Achilles injuries last year coming off of that. So
It's funny because it isn't usually the way NFL or the way businesses operate or the way NFL teams operate, except when they do. Like a lot, they are very this world of the NFL is a business, and they're always trying to get every last nickel out of you they can. They're it's a ruthless thing, but every now and again they do just go, you know what, you were amazing for us, so here's a reward, effectively. And it's like, are we paying for future performance or past accomplishment here? And look. So they remember they signed him a year ago. Like now, like this, it's a year. It's
right.
not like this was an old expiring contract that was past its sell by date. Like he'd been on this contract for less than a year. They signed him last free agent period. Now it was a 3-year deal, so teams don't like letting guys get to the last year of the deal because that's a sort of foreshadowing of problems, and everyone gets upset and blah blah blah. But you're still a year out from that, right? They've basically done this deal a year before they needed to do it in the normal course of things. And they've pushed it into the world where, like, okay, the deal they signed him to was great value from Philadelphia's point of view. It's funny because, like, the Giants didn't want to go above 12 million a year. The Eagles are just giving him 20 million a year. And in either situation, I think it's kind of okay value-wise. Like, the Giants shouldn't have gone beyond 12 million because he was wasted in that team and it wasn't helping. The Eagles just showed what he can do in their offense, and that probably is worth 20 million a year. I just wonder if you needed to do that now. So that would be my only question for Philadelphia. Like, in abstract terms, Saquon just showed he's worth $20 million a year to this team. I don't know that you needed to do this, though, and that's a bit weird.
I'd have to see the structure and what it looks like. They already had void years in his deal, and if there is actually like a somewhat reward the player, but also a business benefit to it. I don't know if this is going to artificially raise the running back market necessarily, because there's not a whole bunch of running backs to pay. That's the other thing. Like, all the good running backs are coming in through the draft and not through free agency. So it's not like the Eagles are playing 3D chess where it's like, oh, we're going to start paying running backs. Now everyone else is going to have to follow suit. Then it won't be that big of a deal. All the running backs are coming in on rookie contracts right now. So I'd have to see how it's all structured to give you a better comment on that.
So that would be the thing. Like, that would be my one. From the outside looking in, I would be like, the value is fine. Saquon has already shown that he can justify that kind of value within this team, but I don't know why they've done it now. Now, if someone can tell me based off the contract structure that this helps them, say, re-sign Zach Bond, then I'm like, okay, cool. No problem whatsoever. Good move, right? Absent of that, it feels like they're rewarding a guy rather than, making a move that needed to happen.
And look, there's a few times that this has happened off the top of my head. It's running backs as well. The Rams rewarded Todd Gurley with a big contract. Just lost my train of thought. Well, the Cowboys thought Zeke Elliott, right? Good locker room guy for them. Yeah, they're like, hey, this is our guy. We drafted him 4 overall. We're gonna lock him up. And those obviously didn't work out. And then the Niners one was also interesting. They were like, hey, Caffrey, you're making good money. We're going to make it much more, extend you, make you the highest paid running back. And of course, a year later, he's injured, right? Because you're right. Listen, Saquon was unbelievable last year, but you are right now at that point, year 7, 8, 9 for a running back, these next few years where things tend to go sour if you're not named Derrick Henry. And as I did see someone yesterday say, well, Derrick Henry looks like an absolute bargain right now for what he's making.
And by the way, the Ravens haven't extended him, right? This is not like an automatic, oh, he had a great season, let's give him more money. So, people in the chat being like, the longer you wait, the more expensive it gets. Okay, but the counter to that is he's literally had the best season he's ever had right now and one of the greatest seasons of all time. You are buying high. I don't know that you necessarily expect him to back up last year's season with another exact replica, right? Like he's not. I would be surprised if Saquon Barkley next year had an identical one of the greatest seasons of all time again. He might still be really good, but if he drops down, a few hundred yards, not quite as effective, a few of those plays that became touchdowns out of nothing are, take place from the 20-yard line, of the opposition instead of your own 20-yard line. Those kinds of things. Like, I don't know that you're necessarily going to replicate that season. And number two, you're another year closer to that 30 threshold that scares teams, right? And starts to depress the value of the contract. So I don't know that it's necessarily true that this is the cheapest this deal could have been if you want to extend him going forward.
A couple other things to touch on recent news here. Osa Odighizuwa does come to an agreement with the Dallas Cowboys. He was going to be one of the highest, most coveted free agents. We had talked about him and Milton Williams from the Eagles being $20 million a year players. The report was 4 years, $80 million. Apparently, the Cowboys disputed the exact contract. I don't know where that ended up landing, but either way, it looks like perhaps a bargain compared to what Odighizuwa was going to make. I think Ari mentioned that earlier on the show. Teams were willing to go up to maybe $24 million per year. So good on Dallas to lock up one of the better interior pass rushers in the NFL.
Yeah, I think you're right that that's going to end up looking like a bargain. I mean, we kind of call this, right, that Odighizuwa and Milton Williams were going to be $20 million a year players, even though I don't know that necessarily either one of them has shown that they've hit that level regularly. The Cowboys getting Odighizuwa locked up before free agency at a price that's in and around that as opposed to way above it. I think the second that Milton Williams signs, this is going to look like an absolute steal.
It's just an interesting time of the year, Sam, because Odighizuwa I thought was one of the more underrated players in the NFL.
Right.
And then, overnight he goes from underrated, sneaky good, great compliment to Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence over the last few years, secret superstar to boom, $20 million a year. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. I don't know about $20 million a year. You know what I mean? So that's all of a sudden he goes from underrated to maybe that's a lot of money. I think good on Dallas locking him up as far as, keeping some level of depth on that defensive line. But this is where I think it's also tricky. Dallas had the first half of the year, one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. They still have a massive need at defensive tackle. Odighizuwa, Mazi Smith, they're both coming back. They were both a part of that run defense that was absolutely torched and has really been a weakness for Dallas over the last couple of years. So it's one of those like free agency. It feels like, oh, we're going to solve this, we're going to solve that, or we're going to lock up our own, but it still doesn't always solve a lot of the issues that you have. In other words, right, Dallas still has work to do up front, including DeMarcus Lawrence hitting free agency, and they need somebody that can hold the point at nose tackle unless Mazi Smith takes a big step in year 3 for the Cowboys. So I think it's a solid move for them, right? You got to pay premiums for guys that can get after the QB, especially on the interior, but there's still more to do, I think, up front for the Cowboys.
Yep, agreed.
And before we got shouty shows coming up today too, by the way. Don't go anywhere. Shouty shows are coming back. Typical Wednesday episode. Sam Darnold and where he's going to land. Let's make some predictions here for Sam Darnold. Where do you think is a good fit? He will not be franchise tagged by the Minnesota Vikings, though the reports are they're still trying to work some stuff out and see if they can bring him back. Is that real or is that just front office talk?
This is fascinating. Like the Darnold thing, I think teams, I don't, or not teams, I don't know that anybody has a good handle on where this is going to land. And I think part of that is because I'm not 100% sure the Vikings know where they want it to land. Like the Darnold thing has been kind of, reports have been everywhere. First, there was clear reports in both different directions that the Vikings will or won't tag Darnold. Now we know they didn't. But then Rich Eisen, one of the rumors he had coming out of his appearance at the combine that he heard a ton from multiple people is that the Vikings will bring back Darnold on a multiple year contract of some kind, right? He was hearing that consistently. So now you're in this world that appears to be what they're working on, some kind of multiple year deal for Darnold. Clearly they know, like, the hang up there is just the money. Like, what does that look like? This is not, they don't want to give him $50 million a year. They probably don't want to give him $40 million a year, but what can you get him for based off the season that he just had, where he looked spectacular within that offense and then imploded right at the end, right? And what does that do to your long-term plan with JJ McCarthy waiting in the wings, who you drafted in the first round? So I do think they're probably trying to get some kind of multiple year deal done at the most reasonable price tag they can do it. But if you're Darnold and you're, Darnold's camp, and you're looking at this, you're like, okay, from a strictly performance point of view, the best place you can be probably is Minnesota, right? Kevin O'Connell, maintain that connection, et cetera, et cetera. From a financial point of view, though, you're telling me the Raiders or the Giants or somebody won't throw you more money than the Vikings are going to be willing to go for? Like, this might be your one shot at the big payday based off that season. If you want to capitalize on it, you're probably going to have to capitalize on it outside of Minnesota.
Do you really buy that they're trying to work something out? Do you think Minnesota really wants to stick with Darnold rather than just going with JJ McCarthy? Like,
Yeah,
was there
because
enough?
JJ McCarthy's the mystery box, right? It's like he might be better than Darnold, but he might not be.
Oh man, and of course the complicating factor was not just they lost their last two games, it was the how. It was the
Well,
how. And
yeah. The problem is that on the one hand, you've got the mystery box that could be anything. On the other hand, the thing that you've got is the mystery box because you don't know which Darnold you're getting. Like you don't know if you get the first 15 weeks of Darnold or the guy that melted down in the most important 2 weeks or something in the middle. Like that's why I think this is chaos, because I don't think anybody has any idea what Darnold is anymore.
I data person here. Analyze, the way I like to analyze. The sample size of the season, I think, should trump the last two games.
But
But
it can't.
I think it has to. However, you still have the case of, because I see the chat talking, give them the Mayfield deal, give them the Geno Smith deal. Those guys have been excellent relative to expectations, relative to the money that they've brought in. Baker Mayfield and the Bucs have made the playoffs the last couple of years, won the division. Geno Smith has had them in the playoffs or on the cusp. Great. They're still at that level of quarterback that leave you wanting more. And so I think that's just where Darnold is. And the fact that the last two games happen to be the worst two is just, that's where you are, right? He's going to leave you wanting more. They also won 14 games. So could you have another season where they win a ton of games? Maybe not 14. They win a ton of games. You have Kevin O'Connell. You have the pass catchers. They're going to spend some money to shore up the interior of the offensive line. Great. But come playoff time, when you have to beat the Eagles and the Lions and, Stafford's Rams, he's going to leave you wanting more. Like I think it's more about that than like, oh no, it's 2019 all over again. This is the old Darnold. I don't think that's the case.
I don't think that's the evidence that we were presented with last year. I think the problem with Darnold is that we saw two diametrically opposed data points, one of which is a greater sample size than the other, but the other of which was the most important two games they played. So we had 15-ish weeks of saying Darnold looks like a different player that isn't just like capable of, this wasn't just he could be viable as a starter. This guy can contend and win a Super Bowl. The Vikings were a week away from being the number one seed in the NFC, and everything going through Minnesota with an offense that looked like it was capable of matching anybody in the league. Like, this was 15 weeks of evidence saying Darnold can be a championship winning quarterback in this team. And then 2 weeks where it was like Darnold can't play. Darnold is non-functional in this offense. Darnold is seeing ghosts again, and a defensive coordinator is making him like cry in this on the sideline. Those are the two data points, right? And you're like, they work in complete opposite directions, and each one of them changes the financial number you want to attach to them by like $50 million, right? Or like $40 million. So I think the problem we're dealing with here is Minnesota going, they both exist. Like, how do you join that in a contract or in a financial situation? Because the difference between the two is like 45 million. So I think they would like to keep Darnold around, not because, they want to do him a solid or because he's a great guy or because whatever. It's like, we don't really know yet what JJ McCarthy is. We've seen Darnold can be incredibly good for a pretty extended period of time, but what we saw at the end is so scary. We don't know how to factor that into a contract, right? Because does that mean is that like the Jimmy G deal where you want to sign him to big money, but you want an out, right? Quickly. You want a way of getting out of that deal like as fast as humanly possible. Or is that like, well, that shows you're a flawed prospect, so we just want to take the dollar amount down, right? We'll still give you a deal, but it needs to look like a Baker Mayfield contract where you're like, you're good, you're not great. That I think is the problem, is it's like they don't know how to structure the contract based off that second bit of evidence, which was terrifying.
I kind of like the idea of bring him back, quick opt-out, and then you have JJ in year 3 or whatever it might be if you need to. But I just don't know if that's where he lands. So is that your prediction, though? Is that where Sam Darnold, is he coming back to the Vikings in your mind?
I really don't. I'm honestly I don't know what the plan is, because I just don't know.
Just make a guess for the people. I mean,
okay, if I'm guessing,
listen, but like this is what you're debating.
Else.
Okay. This is what you're debating, though. JJ McCarthy and all the money that's freed up by not bringing in Darnold, and you get to maybe trade for, well, trading is going to be tough with no draft capital, but sign a couple offensive linemen on the interior, add some defensive depth again, like they did last year in free agency. They made good with all the money that they spent last year. Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, they made good with the money that was freed up from Kirk Cousins. You have similar money freed up now by not going Sam Darnold and going with JJ McCarthy. But yeah, mystery box, as you mentioned. I'll make a prediction that Darnold lands with the Raiders, and that's their big move. And then, to get things back on track over there.
The Raiders would be my guess if I was guessing now, but it wouldn't shock me at all if the Vikings found a way of bringing him back for a year or two.
All right, Check the Mic's brought to you by our friends over at Timeline. You get 10% off your order of MitoPure at timeline.com by using the code Check the Mic at checkout. MitoPure is a supplement that can help you because it encourages cellular renewal. It works by promoting an essential cellular cleanup process that clears out dysfunctional mitochondria, aka your cell's battery packs. There are no supplements on the market that have better clinical research shown to be effective at targeting the effects of age-related cellular decline. With regular use, you'll see and feel the difference in the form of improved energy levels, better workouts, faster recovery, more endurance, and more. In fact, MitoPure has shown to deliver double-digit increases in muscle strength and endurance without a change in exercise. So this is your year to be your best, most energized, most revitalized, to awaken the strength, power, and resilience already in you with the first and only supplement clinically proven to rejuvenate health at the cellular level. Again, Timeline's offering just 10% off your order of MitoPure. Go to timeline.com. That's timeline.com, timeline.com. Use the promo code Check the Mic. All right, Sam, we're going to go rapid fire. I know this isn't always in our vocabulary, but we're flexible. We're going to go, or we're going to go shouty shows first. We'll do, Ben, send me a note. Do you want to do shouty shows first or rapid fire where they sign? All right, rapid fire. Where should they sign? 1 sentence explanation. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Russell Wilson. Where should he sign?
Tennessee Titans. I believe Russell Wilson is now a bridge/backup option at best.
I wrote down the Giants. And then I said, yuck, I hate all of it. I just don't want Russell Wilson as my starting quarterback.
Yeah,
Giants.
He might be a backup.
Yeah, Giants as a fallback. Justin Fields, where should he sign?
Steelers. That's the rumor that is gathering pace, that Pittsburgh wants to bring Fields back and see how that goes.
I agree. Back to the Steelers. You've got the continuity. He played his best ball for 6 games there. Still would rather him be the backup there, but I think he should go back to the Steelers. Ronnie Stanley, the top left tackle on the market.
Patriots, you got the money to spend. You've got a desperate need on the offensive line. Go get the best player out available.
Give me the Ravens. Back to Baltimore. Continuity there. Can still win a ring. And you have Lamar Jackson that people have to worry about. So you don't have to, always pass protect against guys going full steam over at left tackle. How about Khalil Mack?
I'm going to place him with the Buccaneers. I feel like this is a team that's drafted a few edge rushers and still haven't really hit on that guy. Let's go grab a veteran that can add some real heft and solidity to that group.
I think I said it in Fixing Every Team episodes. I'll go Buffalo Bills. Go back to Buffalo, Khalil. Go ring chasing. The Von Miller experiment may not have worked for the Bills, but the Khalil Mack experiment will work. Pair with Gregory Rousseau. Get after the QB. Buffalo for Khalil Mack. How about Josh Sweat?
Chicago. I want double Sweat off the edge more than almost anything this offseason.
Oh, the Sweat combo. You like that line for me. You always say that I'm not funny until I drop some funnies on the show, and then you reference them
Not
later.
intentionally funny. Occasionally accidentally funny.
Well, that was me with the Sweats off the edge. I'll say the Raiders pair him with Max Crosby. They got all this money to spend, and I think they will overspend on some of those, or one or two of those top defensive players. Christian Wilkins coming back, build that defensive line with the Raiders. I like that fit for Josh Sweat. How about Zach Bond, another one of the Super Bowl heroes here?
I really want him to go back to the Eagles. That just made too much sense for everybody. Run it back. Let's do it again. Don't let him out at the building. I know you don't pay linebackers. Make an exception this one time. Make it happen.
I would love to see him back with the Eagles. I do think they're setting things up to kind of reset some of the roster there in Philly. So I'll say the Commanders, right? They got Bobby Wagner just on the 1-year deal last year. Washington building something special. You're going to go in the division and everything, but you got your ring. Zach, go get paid by the Washington Commanders. Last one, as far as rapid fire goes. And all of a sudden we're on track on the show. Charvarius Ward, the 49ers cornerback.
Carolina Panthers desperately need defensive help as well as, help for Bryce Young on the offensive side. Let's go take off some of these positions. Free agent signing with Charvarius Ward.
I was going to say the Minnesota Vikings, after all that Darnold discussion, my assumption is that they're not going to bring Darnold back, even though there's more rumors. So they got all this money to spend. And of all the places, one of the places where they haven't spent yet really is cornerback. So get him out there, play some man coverage, add more flexibility to Brian Flores' scheme. So give me the Vikings for Charvarius Ward. All right, man, we're back. We had a couple off weeks here from Shouty shows, but they're back. Shouty shows, award-winning segment on Wednesdays. We're going to try to do this as much as we can, even throughout the offseason if we can here. Shouty shows, let's get to it, Ben. What do we have for this week?
I do believe a motivated Aaron Rodgers is better than Sam Darnold,
Shannon,
unless Darnold goes back to the system.
Shannon, that ain't the reason to support Aaron Rodgers, Shannon, over Sam Darnold. Here's the reason. The Minnesota Vikings are 14-2.
Oh, gosh.
They said that's right, Shannon. I'm going right back there. Shannon, you remember this when Dio was raving about him? How do you forget that? You usually catch the stuff, Shannon. This man was raving about Sam Darnold. They're pouring water on him like he had won a championship. They didn't even win a division yet. And this man was celebrating them. And I said, yo, did he win something? Did I miss something? What the hell did he win? You still got to go to Detroit in the season finale. There's 13 guys on the injured reserve on the defensive side of the ball. What's he going to do? He's going to have a field day. They got blown out. And then after that, Minnesota went in the first round, got sent home. Just like that. That's Sam Darnold. I'm not picking Sam Darnold over Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
One thing we're missing from not being in studio together is looking at each other's faces when we get to hear these for the first time.
I don't understand what determines the volume level, because Stephen A has, segments, bits where it's it's quiet and it's, measured and it's let me tell you things. And then it's times like that where it's someone's just jabbed him with an EpiPen or something. And he's this one is going to be at 200% volume. We're just going for it, boys. This is where we're going. I don't get what the determining factor is for which style he delivers it in.
It's a good question. If we ever get him on can we get Stephen A on the show? think we get Stephen A on the show to ask him about the art?
Lebitard had him on and told him to his face that he hates what he's done to the media landscape. He seems to be willing to handle it. If he's going to be the Democratic presidential nominee at some point, he's going to have to deal with some harsh questioning. And I think we're the people that deliver it to him.
Stephen A, have you ruined media over the last 15 years? Is it all you? Is it your fault?
Are you about to ruin politics the same way you've ruined sports media?
I mean, I think he's more reasonable politically than he is with sports.
I also feel like politics has already been ruined before he got anywhere near it, so it's not like he can make it worse.
What was the argument? I don't even know what the argument was. A motivated Aaron Rodgers.
Well, that's the
better
thing.
Than a Sam Darnold.
It took me until like his last couple of words to figure out the point he was even making.
I mean, was Aaron Rodgers not motivated last year? Was he just sleepwalking to 5 wins? Wasn't he motivated? He was coming off an Achilles. He was trying to prove everybody wrong. Be the next 40-year-old quarterback to defy age.
He was certainly motivated at the start. It felt like as the year wore on, Rodgers' motivation dwindled.
Well, that's part of the problem. That is part of the problem, right? If you're bringing in a 40-year-old quarterback, you want to probably bring in elite leadership and everything else around it, the stuff that Brady brought to the table and the reason why they won a Super Bowl when he was 43. So, yeah, you're not necessarily getting that with Rodgers.
In every capacity, Darnold is a better option than Rodgers right now. I mean, his ceiling is higher, I think, based off what we saw last year versus Rodgers being 41 and, busted. He's a long-term option as opposed to a short. Like in every way, he's a better option than Aaron Rodgers right now. So the end.
All right. What's next? What do we have?
Debo's the best player in football when the ball's in his hands. Running back or wide receiver. Okay? Because I can put you in the backfield, make plays. I can put you at wide receiver, make plays. He's a guy that whoever he's playing, whoever's on the game plan with Debo, one thing about Debo, he is a baller. The easiest thing to coach in football is a dog. Because I don't have to get you motivated. I don't have to figure out how to get you the ball. I know if I get you the ball, I know what you're going to do with it. And Debo is that type of player.
The best player in the NFL with the ball in his hands. Your thoughts?
I mean, I think if you're talking about Debo at his best, like peak Debo, I think you can make that argument. You can definitely, maybe not the best player with the ball in his hands, but definitely like one of the best players in the NFL because of that position flexibility. Like I made that argument, a few years ago, writing kind of PFF top 50 lists or PFF 101 lists, like it's almost like the Travis Hunter Heisman case, right? Like in either one of them on their own, was he the best receiver in the nation last year? Was he the best cornerback in the nation last year? Probably not. But was he doing both of them at the same time, which is like completely unprecedented? Yes. That's why he's the best player in college football. Like, is Debo the best wide receiver in the NFL? No. Is he the best running back in the NFL? No. But is he doing both at the same time in this weird hybrid role that's an absolute nightmare to defend? Yes. And that was what made him special. And I think one of the best players in the NFL. We haven't seen that guy for a while, though. And that is the question. Like, whatever he was at his peak, I don't think you can make the argument that he is unquestionably that right now.
I also don't think Washington wants to use Debo the same way that he was used at his peak, right? This is, you called Kyle Shanahan Tin Cup, right? He makes the best of everything that he has. And he did it with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback. And when Jimmy Garoppolo is your quarterback, you do need to rely on Debo and Ayuk and Kittle and everybody that they have and get the ball into their hands. The reason why Brock Purdy didn't get credit for a while statistically, and Jimmy Garoppolo's statistics were bumped up, is because we all remember seeing a 3rd and 13 screen to Debo that turns into a first down, and it's like, whoa, how did he do that again? He was special, but to your point, he hasn't done that in a while. But Washington has Jaden Daniels. He still has to be the star of that offense. So I don't think we need to feed Debo 15 carries and 10 more touches through the air. Just go out and play football. And every now and again, you're in the backfield and you're catching screens and you're the wide receiver too. Just go be Debo and you'll be fine.
We also don't know if Debo wants to do that yet. Like, independent of what Washington wants to use him, does Debo want that kind of backfield workload that he had previously in his career now that injuries have started to take hold and be a factor of him? I will say, look, I think the fact that it's a silly claim based off the last couple of years of Debo's career, right? It might have had some kind of sense a couple of years ago, but right now, if you're trying to make that argument, it smacks of a guy that hasn't watched Debo play in the last couple of years. Number two, I do think, though, that people are like, he's washed. If he wasn't, why would San Francisco get rid of him? The 49ers are getting rid of him because of his contract, not because they think he can't play anymore, right? Like maybe they think he's declined a bit or that his best years are behind him, but it's not a one-to-one. San Francisco got rid of this guy, ergo he's damaged goods and is a busted flush at this point. Like that's not how it works. We talked about it with the Joe Tooney contract. Like the deals are important here. Deals age, these affect running back, or these affect player values beyond simply is he good, yes or no.
Like I said, it's difficult to see good play. Like you immediately assume, like if he goes for a 5, if he goes for a 4, he must be old. In baseball, you have veteran players traded for prospects all the time, and that's just a team's way of getting younger. In football, you don't have the young prospect coming back in return. You have the cap space coming back in return. So it doesn't mean that the guy's washed. It just means, again, life cycle wise, teams need more financial flexibility and sometimes have to get rid of good players, even when they're still good. So, all right, one more to wrap up.
You made your money. You can retire today, but you play outside of quarterback, the most important position in the sport. If a good team called you up and said, dude, 2 years, would you go play?
I'm on a good team, so no.
So you're not going to play?
I'm on a good team already.
Well, I know, but I mean.
So nobody else can call me.
This is it.
Dolphins only,
And that's it.
That's it.
But you're kind of pausing.
I'm not. I think it's natural pauses in a conversation. You know what I mean?
That's funny.
Oh, no, that's so awkward. Yeah, so that's Teron Armstead is not a free agent. Colin didn't know.
Colin didn't know. I mean, look, Colin does a lot of television, a lot of television.
I empathize.
That man's on there for hours at a time.
Like, for instance, you and I apparently keep saying that Peter Skoronski was picked at 7
exactly
overall.
I was going to bring up. I was going to be like, look, from my glass house, I am not going to sling the stone that people do not make mistakes. For example, we keep saying Skoronski was drafted 7 overall instead of 11, where apparently they did draft him. Look, pieces of information will be incorrect in your brain when you're doing as much television. And I will say, look, not knowing that Teron Armstead is not a free agent this year, particularly when he's like restructured contracts and stuff, is far less of an egregious information gap for a shouty show talking head than some of the crap that has come out of Stephen A. Smith's mouth that, like, over the years when they ask him to talk football and he's talking about players that haven't been on a team for like 2 years, like that's problematic gaps of information. Not knowing that a dude it wasn't a free agent. Now it's more awkward when that dude is sitting right in front of you and you're arguing with him about it. but I'm not willing to complete. And to be actually, no, let's start over. This is not a Colin Cowherd failing. This is a failing of producers, right? This is effectively whoever Fox's FS1's version of Ben Allen was not in this guy's ear immediately and be like, dude, he's not a free agent. Shut up. That's the failing here. Colin's going to make a mistake because everybody's out here. We're all human. To err is natural. The guy in his ear needed to be like, dude, shut up. He's not a free agent. He's telling you he's not a free agent. Wrap it up, Colin. Go in a different direction. That didn't happen. It's his fault.
You're right. Always blame the producers, right? I mean, Ben didn't catch me saying Skoronski was picked at 7.
It's true.
He didn't come up and say, hey, man, you're wrong. It was 11. Stop saying that. Stop saying that. It was 11. Tyree Wilson was at 7. I should know that. I talk about that all the time. Tyree Wilson at 7. Skoronski's 11. So here we are. Look at us, Sam. You've changed through the years, too. You would have attacked him. You would have attacked Colin years ago until you get a little bit more entrenched in the industry. You empathize with the host. You know how tough it is to have all that knowledge in your brain. Plus, you're older. Think about in your 40s how much knowledge is just like disappearing into just filing cabinets in your brain that you can't access anymore. So I empathize with Colin the same way that you do.
Not just knowledge, but yeah, like now that you're in your 40s, you and I, like just the pieces of your brain that don't fire when you want them to, and you're like, come on, it's there. I know it's there. Let's go. and it just doesn't surface. Imagine what it must be for Colin. He's older than we are.
He's older than us.
So
I'm losing names left and right in my 40s.
I do have some sympathy for that. And I also now I have a much tighter focus for my ire, and it's directed largely towards Stephen A and Mad Dog, right? Other people, it's like, I mean, I don't like this content, but I can live with it. Whereas those two, it's like, this is disgusting, and I hate that it exists.
Honest mistakes are more acceptable than, playing parts that ruin media.
Well, honest mistakes within a margin of like, you should know that, right? Like, should Colin know that Teron Armstead is not a free agent, particularly when he's talking to Teron Armstead? Sure. Is it a more excusable lapse of knowledge than Stephen A talking about players that are important in the upcoming game that haven't been on that roster for like 2 years? Different level of goof here.
All right. So Ben's fighting back in the chat. Producers are fighting back. We're not going to blame Ben. Ben does a great job here.
Wait till he jumps into the
done a
actual
great
show
job
to
for
fight
us.
back. That's when he's really reclaiming the power.
Anthony does a great job for us. All the people that help prepare us and give us information. Look at this. Anthony doing all this work, giving us information that I printed out and used, and Ben giving us the rundown. Shout out to all of the people that can make Check the Mic work here. Would never call them out ourselves. So we did come up with an idea, Sam, and I always bring it up on air awkwardly. Like, should we go live during free agency? Would you watch us just sitting here watching Twitter live? So we're going to be on Twitter waiting for news to break on Monday. Do you want to watch us watch the news break on Monday? And we'll be when we're live here. Do we want to be live? We'll do it
actually happening.
What's that?
We'd be at the mercy of things actually happening.
Yeah, but it could be interactive. We can answer questions. Or maybe it's like after the first few things break at noon, we go live at 1, react to it, and then boom, we just kind of like stay around for a couple hours. Who knows? Just keep it on in the background for the views. Turn on super chats. We can turn on super chats. Anybody interested? Just asking the people. What do the people want? Yeah, I print out some stuff sometimes. Print it out.
I'm a big hard copy guy.
Always.
It's anyway, not laminated though, right?
I did not laminate today's notes. I will have other stuff laminated throughout the off season, though. Appreciate everybody tuning in today. Tomorrow's a big show. We're going to go back to the draft, and we're going to go through top fives at each position. And so we're going to look at what the market is saying, that what they're saying as far as the top fives at each position. We'll go position by position. This is risky, Sam. This is the type of stuff DJ and Bucky do on their show that takes like 30 minutes. And so I'm like, how do you do that in 30 minutes? We'll probably take 5 hours to go through this, but we'll see. So position rankings tomorrow. We'll go through that for the draft. Sound good?
Yep.
All right. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again tomorrow with more Check the Mic.